Hi, and welcome to the August edition of Career Mobility with James Mcilvena. How are you, James?
Doing well. Hopefully, it's going to start warming up soon, but I'm doing well.
I don't know, it was 2 degrees here in Melbourne this morning.
I know, I know. I'm just hoping that spring is around the corner, but dare to dream, hey?
Absolutely, you got to do that. Now, we today, James, are going to talk about some of the awesome events that you've been recently attending. Both are really large HR events. So one in Melbourne, one in the Hunter Valley. So the HR Summit, which was the one in Melbourne, which was actually last week. And then you've fresh back from Hunter Valley from the HR Symposium as well. So what I would love for you to cover today is some of the workforce sort of trends that you've been hearing about, some of the recruitment trends as well, because we know that things are changing out there in the market and would love to hear what you've been learning.
Yeah, so we went to, I went to both. LHH actually presented at both. At the HR Summit in Melbourne, we were there presenting about what changes are expected of leaders in an ever evolving workforce. And so partially that was driven by adoption of AI, generative AI, but also the other external and internal pressures that are changing the face of the workforce. So we'd spoken about that. And
Yeah.
we ran a workshop around a similar theme on what's expected of leaders in a new agile workforce dynamic in this day and age at the HR Symposium last week. But to answer your question, what were the key themes that came out of
Mm,
both of them? And rather than go one by one, it's fair to say that these themes were consistent across both events, and which just adds and different groups attending the events. I mean, then surely there was some crossover of people who were at both events. I did see some familiar faces 2 weeks in a row, but the themes and the learnings were really similar, which just adds credence to the fact that that is the number one thing that leaders are asking their HR teams to think about right now.
yeah.
So number one was similar to the theme we presented in Melbourne, which is why I wanted to outline it. What is, because it felt like the generative AI and the discussion around it beyond who's popped some, chat GPT feeds in and come up with some outcomes. That was the very basic. Now the discussion was that it has significantly moved to be part of people's day-to-day technology utilization, and
Yeah.
that utilization is increasing ever more. And they were talking about broader context organization because they were HR conferences. They were also talking about the adoption within the HR space.
Mhm.
And so there are a couple of key themes that came out of that. One was that, the recruiting for people who have the capability to flex and move and be agile and learn with an organization was more critically important at this juncture in time than it's ever been before, because there is now a feeling that skills, rather than recruiting based on people's skills and their capability and their potential, has started to come to the fore versus recruiting against what you've done in the past predicts what you'll do in the future, because there's now this whole new dynamic, which is what you've done in the past might be done and automated in future. So therefore,
Yeah.
if you're just hiring on a job someone's done that might be automated, then you need to be hiring on their ability to understand. And as I say, all that, the overwhelming theme was that this type of thing is not here to replace jobs or remove jobs, but it will fundamentally shift. And if you're asking people to, with the time they're given back, to process more human-centered components of their role, then recruiting on leadership capability, recruiting on the ability to demonstrate empathy, support, guidance, be the interface between anything that is done that's driven by AI and what's provided as an output, to ensure that whether it's internal or external customer facing, you're not just accepting what a machine spits out. And so where does the human provide the interface between the two? So that was probably that plus the move to agile workforce, as in tribes, scrums, use of people being able to work cross-functionally, and how those same skills solve both issues. That
Yeah.
was probably 80% of the discussion at
Wow,
both.
interesting. Is that so? Was that looking at both, obviously, increase in skill set, so willingness to learn new kind of, I guess, what we could call hard skills, but was it also about the willingness to, I guess, that whole idea that you can't train attitude? Was it about, let's, when we're interviewing people, let's be really clear about that this person is someone who's going to be willing to trial and error things, and to kind of be part of the solution, and to find new ways of doing things as we move forward as a workforce?
Very
Yeah.
much so. And
Yeah.
how that would be assessed, and is the way with traditional interview, the way it's been assessed previously,
Mm.
the way that things will continue to be assessed going forward. So
Yeah.
there seemed to be, without there being one finite answer or outcome, there seemed to be a lot of discussion on how do you best make that capability assessment. But absolutely, you're spot on. This concept of how's that person going to move, change? What is their learning agility? How can they demonstrate
Mm.
that to us? But it wasn't just the ability to learn. It was the fact that if you are considering that what needs to be done as things evolve, it needs to be more human to human. It needs to rely on those leadership fundamentals. How do they also assess on the leadership fundamentals as well as the willingness to learn and be agile and move with the organization?
Yeah, absolutely. Because even if you think of it from an HR or an ATS, system sort of structure, it's no longer about keywords and what you've done, or only about that. It's absolutely about the forward focus, which definitely is, I imagine, quite an interesting quandary, really, about how to recruit for the new way of being.
Absolutely. So then part of that discussion, to exactly what you said, is then there's skills attribution, and
Mm.
and is self-informed skills attribution, as in James says that he's good at all of these things because he's ticked the
Mm.
box that I have these skills, or um, he has uploaded his resume and the system has extracted that these are the skills we're going to attribute to James.
Okay.
But
Yep.
then that versus assessed skills. So it's a self-attributed skill just because it's been plucked from my CV and attributed to me as a skill. At what level do I possess that skill?
Mm.
Or if I'm saying that I have a particular skill, do I, or am I going to be placed into a role that requires that skill and someone's upset because it's not at the level that is required? So assessment of skills was a big discussion point, as was how do we develop skills. And so this is where
Mm.
if you are assessing for someone based on future capability, how do we actually allow people to learn and acquire skills internally? And so a lot of discussion on not just letting an agile workforce structure do the role, but how is their internal project marketplaces to allow people to extend themselves, acquire skills, provide growth beyond the traditional vertical. I'm in this role, I need to then move to team leader. If there's a team leader role, I need to then move to the manager role. How is that environment on how you acquire skills and move in your career journey much less linear than what it has been for so many years?
It really kind of adds to that career mobility. I mean, we talk about this as, the podcast is all about that. So it's, and this conversation is always about career mobility, but it's starting to get very exciting, I think, in this space, because it offers more opportunity. It definitely is a richer work experience when you get to work on sort of cross-functional projects and work perhaps with teammates or other, cross-functional teams that you don't usually work with. It's certainly the agile way of being, and operating within an organization. So it sounds like, yeah, definitely interesting discussions that you had, but it's like, the solutions aren't necessarily there yet. It's really more discussions required to get that organizational development and structure working in a way that everyone feels comfortable, but yeah, has the opportunity to learn and grow.
It is. I think the fundamental difference, though, TJ, because it feels like I've been talking about this and been banging the drum on career mobility and the requirement for it for quite a number of years. My number one takeaway from the events of the last 2 weeks was that it's moved from being a nice to discuss conceptually, and it is definitely here. And yes, while all the answers are not there yet, that it's out of time to discuss it as a what are we going to do, but it's what we need to do because it's already upon us. That was the fundamental shift, that that the awareness, that the adoption rate is picked up, and that maybe there's some now looking to people who were sort of earlier adopters as to how they were going to deal with these things and put solutions in place. That was the shift. I think we'll start to see, not everyone, but I think we'll start to see more HR teams looking at how they solve this problem, because it's definitely what their leaders are asking of them.
Yeah, it's an interesting one, isn't it? Because even when you think back to, I mean, you think of systems like LinkedIn, for example, that will have what are your skills? To date, it's really been sort of beginner, intermediate, advanced. How does that start to become more of a sliding scale and really more helpful for individuals to kind of assess themselves, but also, to ensure that they are able to deliver within a project environment, or have the opportunity to learn and grow and have the time to do that, and the aptitude.
Yeah, and so therein lies the quandary, right? Which is where the solution has not been come up with. So it's that blend of, if I've self-attributed a skill, it's not been an assessed skill. So I could put advanced, and my advanced might be someone else's basic, right?
Exactly.
And then you've got the overlay of the traditional issues that we've faced a lot when it comes to gender equity in employment, around the fact that a male's way more likely to overestimate their skills and capabilities and females likely to underestimate it. Is that going to so there's that? So therefore the assess skills is one component of it. How do you actually assess skills to get a proper benchmark versus self-attribution of skills? But then secondly, how important are the skills being baseline level of skills that you have high numeracy, for example, which can be assessed, rather than the specific skills, and therefore the personal traits are way more important than the hard skills in tomorrow's workforce economy.
Yeah, I mean, our last conversation back in July was all about AI and kind of how that's having that impact now in sort of our workplaces. The human side of it, obviously, is the tempering really of that process. And you would talk, when we always talk prior to jumping on together, that thing of automation, AI, digitisation, they're all big conversations. And then how do we help people who are in transition to understand, well, this is where you've come from. Obviously, this is where you're at now. What are you looking to do? And what are the potential skill gaps, or what's happening in that industry, so that you can just make sure you're in the the right sort of space and skill level in order to be right for those types of organizations. It's not an easy question to answer right now, is it?
Look, it isn't. And there was some sort of pretty scary data presented around the rate of adoption on how long it took to reach the number of users that AI has in the time frame it has. It's scarily short around how quick this is moving. But the takeout for anyone who is thinking of this from the job seeker angle, it's probably three things. One, how can I actually demonstrate my understanding of this being the context in which people are now looking for people? And so how do I demonstrate that I'm strong on the human to human components? And that doesn't require you to have been across a bunch of AI stuff. It just requires you to be able to articulate in a very clear manner how, if you're fortunate enough to have held a leadership position, how you've actually been really good at those human-centered components of being a leader. If not, how you've actually interacted. If you've not had leadership obligations in the past, how you've been able to deal with the human interface with customers or in an internal role, but focusing on that human component was point number one. Point number two was, how can you demonstrate if people are hiring for attitude, potential, capability? How can you demonstrate, it's short of being assessed on it, where you have picked up new skills, where you've invested in yourself, where you've put learning agility to the forefront as something that's important to you. And so the ability to articulate that is going to be helpful, whether it's specifically assessed, or not. And then I think the final point is actually just around understanding that broader landscape. So if there are specific trends in your industry when it comes to pace of change, tech, automation, the way the industry is moving, if you understand that you have a view on how these things are going to shape the industry in future and how that links to the strategy of the industry. So, and it doesn't need to be at a highly complex level. It can be everything from one of the things that they were talking about was how, if taken as a given, AI is going to be able to provide better data sets to allow more informed decisions by almost any role, how you can actually use data, add a human overlay to using that data to make better decisions, better outcomes, better recommendations and suggestions for customers. They're the type of things, and looking at not just letting the data drive the decision, but letting data inform the decision and what role that plays and how you can adapt to it. So those are the types of three big takeaways from a job seeker perspective that would be amazingly good to. You don't have to go in and say, these are the three things I want to tell you, but being ready with a response on top of your marketing plan, on top of these other things, being ready with a response on those three key trends would be useful and help people not getting caught by surprise if this is part of the discussion that's going on in the employer that they're in discussions with.
Yeah, absolutely. I think those and interviews, as we spoke about last time about source stories, like make sure you've got examples of these. As you were talking there, James, as well, of course, I always think of LinkedIn. I think of the branding, and I think of, a lot of people, obviously, when they come through transition, haven't really been using LinkedIn as much. You could actually use LinkedIn to demonstrate a lot of this as well. So I kind of had a couple of acronyms coming up for me. So POC as point, a proof of concept. With LinkedIn, proof of concept can be done in many different ways, and it can be done by your posting and then you're featuring that on your LinkedIn, or even the media that you share within your roles that that demonstrate. To me, it's like a sort of artist portfolio. That's your work examples, in your actual portfolio, demonstrating exactly some of the things that you've done, maybe the accreditations that you've taken part in. Maybe it is an AI accreditation or whatever it is, those badges and things that say, I have done this, and by the way, here's proof. So I love that proof of concept idea. Then there's also POV, so the proof of your point of view. So it's not an opinion, but it's just a point of view. You might have an opinion or a point of view around what's going on in the workforce at the moment, or related to your area of expertise, and then talking about some of this stuff that's really relevant today in the market. And again, you're talking about it. It's kind of thought leadership. It becomes thought leadership because of the way that it's positioned within that place. And then recommendations. Recommendations are a brilliant way to actually demonstrate not what you're saying about you, but what other people are saying about you. So again, all of these things are really kind of almost simple tools that can just really enrich your brand on LinkedIn. But more so than that, they actually start talking to exactly what we're talking about here. And I think it's one of those things where the world has changed, since the world collided, home and work came together during, the whole COVID experience. Now it's really about that human, it's digital plus human. And it's like, how can you demonstrate that and show that your willingness to be part of that solution, I think. And again, that's a great platform to do it in a business context.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think that final point you made is so important. It's like the digital plus human. And so if there's one takeaway from everything we've just discussed, it's like so what makes you bring the right human components right now? Focusing on that. I mean, it's never not been important.
Yeah.
It's always been important. You know, it's been the case where for as long as I've been in recruitment, which is a hell of a long time, right? The concept of culture fit has been fundamental
Yeah.
to hiring of people. And that had nothing to do with digitisation, automation, AI, generative AI. You know, culture fit's been around forever and a day. Just it's taking that a step further now and saying beyond just, you know, do I fit in? Do I like the culture of the company? And do they think that I would pass the good, in my instance, good bloke test? You know, it's going beyond that to actually be more articulate, to not just I'm a match to the company culture, to being like I'm actually a driver of culture. I'm one of those people who's a culture carrier or a culture champion within an organization because I look after the human components. As a leader, I'll make sure I show empathy for my people. I'll understand them. I'll be available. I'll be that's really the difference, not that all of a sudden they're assessing on the human components.
Yeah. And like you say, it hasn't changed. These things have always been important. It's just, it's almost like, I think, you know, here in 2024, August 2024, it's like a spotlight is being shone on these things as something that are just really important to, one, be aware of, but then also to take action on. Chat to your coaches, have a think about how are you doing this? And is it part of your conversation at the moment? Where are you seeing this show up in your networking? And again, networking's on those things where it's about reciprocity, you know, what you give, you get back. You know, it's that kind of thing. So, you know, being out there and having these conversations and learning from experience of those interactions is really important.
Absolutely. And I think that bit about the human component being more important, the other bit is that not altogether, but the being able to rely on this is what I've done in the past, these were my last roles. That hasn't disappeared at all, but it is actually starting to hold less importance in the assessment process. So those two things together would be the key trends to be discussing with the coach. And of course, you know, how you utilize that networking, because as we all know, networking is not always, but most often the key to that next right opportunity.
It absolutely is. I actually, it's funny, James, I'm sitting here thinking I maybe have a crystal ball or some kind of view into the future. Back during COVID, I actually remember writing an article called Being Relevant is the New Black. And I think this conversation is all about that. You know, it's about being relevant in the market, in your environment, in your, you know, speciality. And these are like the common trends, I think, across most organizations and industries these days, that you need to be able to consider these concepts. Digital or human, how are you going to do them, and how are you going to make them work for you as an individual, but also for the new team that you're potentially going to join.
Yeah. No, it was quite funny. One final thing that I took out of it, it was a part of one of the discussions over the last few days, and this is where it's the relevance being. Sometimes concepts can be ahead of their time, and they talked about the fact that as a real example of automation versus AI, that when ATMs were first introduced, it was predicted that, oh, that's it, all bank tellers are done. You know, their roles are going to be replaced. And in fact, the numbers of tellers actually increased post the implementation of ATMs, but it was actually many decades later, when there was a more holistic move to digital banking, that the branch closures started to happen, and it waited for the customer drive to be less footfall into the branches, which made the change, not the introduction of a new feature like the ATM. And so thinking of it in that way, that relevance is the key rather than an external market factor like the introduction of chatbots in an industry or ATMs being introduced is necessarily the driver. So it's just a perfect place to leave it. That relevance is the new black, and understanding what's going on in the industry and understanding your part in it, and then articulating, how you're willing to lead, move, bring your human skills to whichever organization you're targeting or in discussions with, will be the thing that will ultimately allow you to position yourself in the best possible manner.
Yeah, absolutely. Brilliant stuff. Well, thank you so much, James. I can't wait to hear what you've got to share next month. I know it's a busy one for you, so very much look forward to it, and take care.
Thank you so much. Thanks, TJ.
Cheers.